Hello and good afternoon. My name is Arshia Hussein, and I am the intern for Small Change Podcast. Small Change Podcast's purpose is to combat the misconceptions about people in low-income backgrounds and how they understand money. Often we think that they don't know how to manage money, but they are often creative and collaborative. Through Small Change, you'll learn that community is the best investment a person can make. Today, I am joined by our co-hosts, Chris Farrell and Twyla Dang, and later we'll be joined by one of our Season 1 guests, Bo. Chris is a senior economics contributor at the Minnesota Public Radio and Marketplace, American Public Media's nationally syndicated public radio business and economic programs. He is a columnist for PBS Next Avenue and the Minneapolis Star Tribune. He's written several books, with his most recent, Purpose and a Paycheck. Twyla is an entrepreneur and founder and CEO of Matriarch Digital Media, a women-centered, focused media company and online community that understands, encourages, and uplifts women. She says that we are changing the way the world talks to and talks about women and girls. She combines women-focused content and actionable steps to build community across audio, social media platforms, and live events. Thank you both for being here today. How are you today?
Good. Good to be here.
We're excited to be here.
Yeah.
I'm excited that you.
This
is great.
So how did you two come together to create such a meaningful podcast? What was the story behind that?
So I guess I'll start off on this one. Had this idea for a long time, just was really troubled about the way that the personal finance industry and economists, the economic industry, talk about money, financial literacy, and people who are living on low and unstable incomes. And if you look at my career, there are kind of two strands. One is economics and one is personal finance. And these two strands always had this notion that, if people that are living on lower incomes were just smart with their money, they'd be so much better off. And yet the problem is, when I would talk to people, when I would talk to my mom about her growing up, the story always was that they knew where every penny was going, that they knew what they were doing with their money. What they didn't have was much money. And so that was really the genesis of the idea. It was nothing more sophisticated than that. And it's evolved since then. And Twyla really helped evolve the idea when she came on. And I'll probably have the timing a little bit off, but say we got the go-ahead to do the project from Minnesota Public Radio, American Public Media, the Empire. We got the go-ahead. And Twyla, you came on, I think, in March or toward the end of March, right?
Yeah, I did. I came on, I think, unofficially a week before the lockdown started. So we kind of said, we're going to make this thing together. And then we all went to our houses and said, we'll see you soon. And then we actually, by the time we got into real production, it was June. And we had a pretty short timetable. One thing you'll learn about me is I'm all about keeping a deadline. So we wanted to finish project in September, and we were finished with all 8 episodes and ready for season 1 to roll out September 1.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt here, but I always would be saying, we could take another week. This is a self-imposed deadline. And Dwight, I go, no, we said September 1. And we did meet the deadline. Yes, we did.
Yeah, I am. But I will say to Chris's credit, getting the show up and running, he had a clear vision of what he wanted to do. And structurally, having me come on board, I understood where the nuance needed to get built in here. And so as we started to work together, we started to refine everything, whether from the language that we used to the types of stories we wanted to highlight. And luckily for us, as we moved into the process, we just kept getting so lucky and running into these wonderful people, and each story was better than the last story. And it, to be honest, it kind of made some of our job easier for us. We had a mission in mind, but the people brought it to life.
And one of the things that we really wanted to do was make each episode narrative driven. It's not Twyla and I. It's not dominated by Twyla and I and our interactions. There are no experts. The experts are the people that we interview. And so it was to give them the space, the time to tell their story, to shed light on some aspect of personal finance. And I think we came in, I think this is right, Twyla. We came in with this kind of idea that we thought, it would be about community, collaborative, being creative. But I don't, at least I can speak for myself, how strong the community component of it was. That actually the foundation of thinking about personal finances in the interviews that we did, community is where it started from. And if you think about a lot of the personal finance that you hear on television or on radio or that you read in print, it starts with the individual. What can you do? What habits can you have? How can you do this better? And our conversations reverse that. It starts with collaboration and community.
And I'll give us a little less credit because I think we had an idea that we knew where we kind of wanted it to go. But I think even when we started the project, we approached it from a little bit of a traditional view. We were thinking, oh, we'll highlight tips and we'll highlight things you can do and we'll walk you through steps. And then we sat down with one of our first interview participants, and she just turned the entire thing on its head because she really highlighted and illustrated what it looked like when community comes together. And as soon as she did that, we right back to the drawing board. We said, okay, we have to rethink everything here. We have to rethink how we let people tell us their stories. We have to rethink how we gather the information, because now it's not just tell us how to do X, Y, and Z. It's tell us your story. And then we started to see, as people told us the stories, the connections and the parallels and the wonderful coincidences that all tie back to the same thing, is that it starts with community. It starts with care for community. It starts with people not being focused on the individual, but focusing on doing the most good.
And, we wanted to do this anyway, but I think we both felt more and more strongly as the interviews went on to really push against the stereotypes about that, if you have a low income, you're not smart about money, to look at a neighborhood and only see the deficits in that neighborhood and not look at the assets in that neighborhood and the assets that the people bring to their community. And, this is going to be a hard slog, but even in casual conversations, we'll run up against people and they will just make assumptions. And these assumptions are really wrong. And so that aspect of, emphasizing the community aspect, but also really pushing hard against very ingrained negative stereotypes with a total concentration on a sort of deficit mindset when talking about money and people living on lower incomes.
Yeah. Thank you for that insight. We did a call out to the public, actually, and we got some pretty interesting questions. Ananta asks us, why am I so scared to buy a house? And I noticed throughout a lot of these questions, there's this fear of money. Where do you think that fear of money comes from? And how do you think we can change that?
Well, I think the fear of buying a house is real just scarcity mindset. I mean, we have all had, and particularly in the last few years with the pandemic and all of the contributing factors to it, we've all felt unstable. We've all felt out of control of circumstance. And I mean, that's a very real thing. And to be perfectly honest, if you're coming from a background and money wasn't something that was readily available, if you did have to rely on and lean on community in a very specific way, if you did have to work multiple jobs or, had to struggle or take out loans to pay for things like your education, I mean, you're already starting in some ways at a deficit. And so thinking about risking the little bit of financial leverage you have to take on, one of the biggest financial risks you could take as an individual that's a tough thing to approach. And I think even the person who does have, money put in the bank and an approved mortgage and, pre-approved mortgage and are looking in the housing market, anybody in the conditions that we're living under right now it would be foolish not to be a little bit concerned. It would be foolish not to have some fear of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's the biggest financial purchase that most people ever make. And it is a lot of money. And, a lot of people, we just, haven't grown up with how do you buy a house? How do you evaluate a house? And so one of the things that, and I think coming from small change is don't do it on your own. And even with a partner, don't just do it with a partner. Tap into your local resources, tap into people you know, tap into people who have owned a home in a neighborhood you might want to live in. And think about, do you want to go in with more than your partner? Do you want to go in with a couple of other people, buy a bigger house, but share some of the expenses, which more and more people are doing, sort of cooperative living. And even if you don't want to embrace cooperative living, that's just not something for you, I really think you really want to try and tap into all the people you know, all the knowledge, the resources that are out there. There's lots of resources that will help first-time home buyers, really understand what are the obligations you're taking on here? What are the expenses you're taking on here? What are the benefits? And so take your time. We're at a period of time while we're having this conversation where the housing market is somewhat insane anyway. So I would just simply be using this time not to think, I'm going to go out there and buy. It'd be, okay, where do I want to live? What do we think we can afford? Tap into your resources, do your research. And that's not going to eliminate your fear, but it does mean that when you finally make a choice, you have knowledge and you have a support of a group of people that are going to help you out. And they're going to show up when you actually do buy the house. And they're going to be there to also support you when you finally have to realize, oh, what do I do when a boiler breaks down?
Thank you, Chris, for that insight. I really appreciate it. I think that is one of the biggest takeaways from Small Change, at least from season 1, is that community is the best investment that you can make. And so I want to know for you two personally, what does that mean to you? What communities are you a part of, and how you recommend to others to invest in the communities that they're also part of?
That's funny because I came running in here to get here on time because one of the main communities I'm a part of here in the city is the entrepreneurial community. I'm a small business owner on top of producing and hosting this podcast. And I have a deep investment in wanting to support other business owners, particularly Black and Brown business owners like myself, creative entrepreneurs, because we've all, at least in the last few years, we've had a more sort of difficult road in terms of maintaining ourselves and what we do during the pandemic. A lot of us have creative businesses, and there isn't always extra resources for the types of things that we produce or that we make. So leaning on a network is everything from, how to help each other. Is like any port in a storm. How can I support you? Do you need a loan? Do you need resources? Do you need to borrow equipment? To, hey, maybe we should think about consolidating resources and moving into spaces together. I have been eternally grateful for the community of folks that I found since I've become an entrepreneur. But I would say they're absolutely one of many groups I'm super lucky to be a part of. I've got a community of moms that I, live around. We all have kids who are growing up together. I now have this, community of mentors and friends and, professional, who work in different professions, but we all have the same sort of struggles with where we are in our lives and retirement and how we're going to plan for our futures or take care of our aging parents. So I think, if anything, working on this podcast just reinforced how fortunate I am to know the people I know. And it made me work that much harder to strengthen those relationships and deepen those relationships.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I'm just having so much fun being part of the Small Change community. It's not a very big one yet. But, it's just a lot of fun. And, but, I'm part of communities. A lot of it has been driven by journalism and places that I've worked, like at Business Week, and then maintain those relationships working here. And I stay in touch with people. And one of my roles that I play for people, which I enjoy, is I do kind of like risk analysis for them. I don't actually... I rarely suggest what people should do, but they'll call me up and say, how do I think through this particular situation or this particular issue, or whether I should buy a home or whether I should start a business? And I really enjoy that. And the thing is, but then, I call them and do the exact same thing. I don't necessarily want you to tell me what to do because I'm going to do it, but what do you think? How do you think it through? And so, we all have these networks, and we had this wonderful interview. And I think it was like a highlight interview for Twilight. I think this is fair to say, when it was Tanya Brinston. And, She said, not all assets are financial assets. And she wanted to talk about skill and the people and she has gone for like 2 decades to a woman who cuts her hair, and she's priced it in the market. She just like it's way lower, but at the same time, Tanya recommends for people to go to her. And one of her neighbors has tomatoes, green tomatoes in the area, and go in and pick the tomatoes whenever you want. And she knows plumbers. And so, if you think about it, we all have a lot to offer to each other, but a lot of times we don't really think about it. So one of the things I think this program has done is made me much more sensitive to or aware of skills I have and skills other people have. And the other thing I will say is what COVID did is reinforce the importance of reaching out to people, talking to people, just checking in on them. How are you doing? What's going on? There's no practical purpose to that, but it's really important to do.
Yeah, I think personal assets is a great way to think about money and what you can do to help your community. And I think that's going to be the focus of today's conversation. We do have a Facebook comment coming in. An important group of people to consider with communities with lower and unstable incomes are elderly, refugees, immigrants that might not know of practical money skills because of a language barrier or age barrier. And that's from Mahad Omar. And we asked, would there be a way to talk about unique situations that immigrants find themselves in?
Oh, absolutely. My last name is Dang because my husband came to the United States when he was 4 years old. And I have had in my immediate family wonderful humans who happen to have immigrated here from Vietnam in the late 70s, early 80s. And I've watched them. And supported them and loved them as they have gone through processes, as they have tried to figure out things. And I know absolutely that there are not just barriers of not cultural understanding or sometimes language barriers, but sometimes there's structural and institutional barriers. There are, traditional thoughts about who is a good risk and who isn't. There is traditional barriers on people's estimations of your intelligence and what you're capable of just based on the fact that you might have an accent or a thicker accent. And I feel really fortunate that we happen to live here where there are more resources. We happen to be, a community that makes more of an effort to do everything from produce materials in different languages to providing, interpretation help. But there's still the society at large that sometimes you have to contend with. And one of the things I admire most about my family is they not only help, themselves as individuals, but they help each other at the drop of a hat. They all pull together, they pull resources, but they extend that outside of their, immediate, our immediate family too. They help in community. My mother-in-law volunteers and does, wonderful dynamic work. And it's the kind of thing that inspires us to go and do, wonderful and dynamic work. But it's a part of understanding that you're not just on your own. It's not just you. You're a part of a whole. And the way that my family, extended family, has come into the country and made themselves a part of the whole and said that it's not just, they're not just looking out for themselves in the corner. They're looking out for the greater good too. It's something I'm proud of, and it's something I'm proud that my children get to see every day too.
Yeah, and it's, we've had numerous stories while we've been, taping with Small Change about different immigrant groups coming together, solving problems together, pooling their resources together. And, again, trying, living without much and trying to, yet at the same time, own a home, start a business, educate your children. I mean, all the standard things. And it's been a very, I think that's a very strong component. A couple of years ago, I went out to Fremont, California. It's a very large immigrant community in Fremont. And it was a story I was working on about loneliness. And it was elderly immigrants who had come from Vietnam or China, Taiwan, different places, India, to take care of the grandchildren while the parents were building their career. But now the parents were older and they were what worked when it was just the family. There was a lot of loneliness that they were dealing with, and how to address that. And the community was really working on it. People were becoming more aware of it. And a lot of it really had to do about there was a sense of purpose while you're taking care of the grandchildren, and need a sense of purpose when the grandchildren are off on their own, which is what was happening. And so that was extremely important. And it was about connections, about having conversations, and about pooling resources within the community to continue to contribute.
It's really fascinating. I want to talk and revisit the concept that we talked about earlier, how the concept of small change itself changed. I think even for me, when I first heard of small change, I assumed it would be about financial literacy. But you're talking about in the first interview, you sat down and you realized we need to change this whole idea. What was that conversation like? Is it easy to change the concept of a podcast so quickly?
Well, I'll let you take this one, but we did it.
We walked in, and I think when we sat down for our first interview, we really had I think we made the mistake of planning it all out in our head. And I think we were at the time approaching the guests like they would be plug and play. Like they're going to talk about credit, and they're going to talk about mortgages, and they're going to talk about savings. Yeah. And then we started talking to Tanya, and if you don't know Tanya, she's already like this bigger than life person. And at one point she leaned in and she said to us, and I will regret this till the day I die, because I'm an audio producer, and I did not have her recorded saying this the first time she said it to us. She leaned in and said, listen, we'll have you thinking that financial assets are the only assets that matter. And when she said it, I looked at Chris looked at me, and both of our faces went blank, like, oh no, we like this. She's absolutely right. And we said, okay, tell us more, really like explain it to us, explain what you mean. And she started to tell us these stories. And the thing is, when she started to tell the stories, it wasn't new information. I had that experience growing up. Chris had that experience growing up, but we were we were so deeply entrenched in the idea that we needed to somehow teach people. And that was the absolute crystal moment. It was like, we're not here to teach anybody anything. We're here to learn. We're here to be the conduits that people can learn from each other, so that people can learn that they already possess and contain and have skill sets and tools and knowledge. And we have to find a way to change that. So we got off the call with Tanya, and we talked to each other the next day, and we were like, we got to throw this all out and start again. We really do. We got to rethink this whole thing. And we did, probably with like a week to spare. Yeah. And I'm super grateful because otherwise we would have accidentally made the thing that we didn't want to make. Just from a different vantage point. And instead we wound up making an entirely new conversation that I'm extremely proud of.
And it ended up being so much more fun because we were just sort of sitting there learning, curious, asking questions, and people would tell us these stories. And they're very practical stories, but they're very moving stories. And so we learn, and we hopefully, the listeners learn from it. But I think, not quite sure this is right, but I think from that moment till now, we've never used the term financial literacy. We've used it a couple of times in this conversation, just sort of because it's part of the background. But financial literacy was a term that we just said we're never using again in the context of small change, because we're learning. We're learning about ways to deal with difficult situations. And these difficult situations, they're acute. They're particularly acute when you're not making much money. But the reality is so many people are dealing with the pressures and the stresses and the strains that, these lessons, apply to so many people. But I think it's just been, the conversations have been so enjoyable because you're just sort of sitting back and going, wow, what a story. And then it's another story. And then it's another story. I mean, we learned about tithing, learned about lending clubs. We've learned about savings clubs. I mean, we've learned about so many ways that people combine their resources to accomplish very basic goals.
Yeah, that's so amazing because I think from the podcast, originally people are looking for education. And while it still is education, by destigmatizing or getting rid of that narrative that people in low income backgrounds don't understand money and they need our education, is really fascinating. And we talk about in Small Change empowering others through storytelling, and I think that's really inspiring. I want to thank you both for having that amazing discussion. Our next guest that we're inviting is Bo.
Ah,
Bo is the Bo is the executive director of the Coalition of Asian American Leaders, and she is a guest from season 1. Welcome, and thank you for being here today, Bo.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you all.
it's great to see you.
Good to see you again.
So how is good?
I'm saying Bo's one of our favorite people that we talk to. She really is, and she's are what you're hands down. When people listen to the podcast and they come back and they ask us questions, they always ask us a couple of things. There's another person they ask us about, but they always ask us about your uncle and the store and how it's doing. Always.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad it resonated, because sometimes it feels like it's just our story.
Well, why don't you tell us this story again for the people who are watching this about your uncle and how his grocery store got started?
Sure. So my uncle many years ago wanted to start a grocery store, but of course he didn't have enough capital to start the grocery store. So he asked his families, and when I say family, I don't mean just immediate family. In our culture and community, family really is it includes your extended family members. And so he asked if people had financial resources that they could loan to him to start. And he didn't have a relationship with banks and those kinds of things. And so he turned to his family, and we all did what we could financially to help him open up his grocery store. And they have been around for, I think, maybe 2 decades now, but are doing very well. And so I think it sort of just shows how people have both generously supported each other, but it's also the concept of what it means to have wealth, and that wealth is both financial, but it's also about relationships and being able to support each other achieve our dreams, right?
And
Now, Bo, can you
go ahead.
a little bit? I'm sorry. Can you tell us a little bit about like what that looks like? So, at least from my perspective on the podcast, when we talked to you, I found it fascinating that your uncle could come and just say, "This I need something, and would you be willing to help me?" And how sort of freely and lovingly and openly you all just said, "Okay, we're going to come together." Can you talk about that spirit of cooperation in your family?
Sure. And I don't think it's just my family, but I think it comes from cultures that are more collective, I guess, right? Where the idea of prosperity is about collective prosperity and not necessarily just individuals. And as my mother always said, if you make it on your own and you are, you have all the fancy things, but you look and your brother or sister don't have those things, how would that make you feel, right? And if you look around and you have, a family member who is not doing well, but you haven't helped at all, that should make you uncomfortable, right? And so I think it's sort of on that idea. And so that is the culture that I grew up in, which is really that I want to succeed for myself, but that I also want to contribute to making sure that my family members can also achieve their dreams that they have for themselves, and that when they do well, that we all can sleep in comfort and knowing that everybody is also doing well. So my mother always said, the purpose of life is to be helpful. And so we try to do that. And also, I think you have to remember that the Hmong community is a community that has survived, not because of the financial means that we have, but because of the relationships that we have, in particular in in families and things like that for many generations now. And so when you have nothing at all, you have your relationships, and that those are now means by which people are able to support each other. We have a few new tools in terms of financing and all of those things, but the relationships are still an important vehicle for building wealth. And I think that is often what communities turn to begin to build their own dreams.
So when you started earning a paycheck, was that different? Say, like when I started earning a paycheck, okay, here I'm making this certain amount of money, and maybe I put some into retirement savings, that kind of thing. But when you started earning a paycheck, were there other ways that you were looking at that money?
For sure. I, you know, my siblings and I, we helped my mom farm every summer, I think since we were in upper elementary school, all the way till I was in 10th grade. And none of that money was for our own individual use. So there was always, the summers were always when we could make extra capital to support the family, to make big purchases like buying a car. And that money was always pooled. And so I never even saw any money until I got into 10th grade. And after the cucumber picking season of the summer, my mom gave us each $100. And I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with this $100? And that was the first time that I actually could go to a Kmart and buy my first pair of new jeans. So we always knew that the money that we earned was for the family. And then when I was old enough to actually start earning a paycheck, she gave us a little bit more freedom to keep some of it, but a lot of it was also to help our families. So I think, I grew up with that understanding that it was important to contribute to the family, and that if we had a car, it was used by all of us. If we had a TV, it was used for all of us for entertainment, those types of things, right? So there was never, this is mine. And I have to tell you that that concept is a little foreign. My husband is Japanese American, but when he married me, he would be like, what do you mean your siblings can borrow our car for the weekend to go, And I said, yes, it's community property and and things like that. So I think it's just the idea of it's not the things that belong to me individually, but it's about how I help to take care of my family as well. So they don't do it all the time, but we've lent cars or those types of things. And then on occasion, there will be times where a family member, for example, my aunt needed to get to Fresno for a funeral and she didn't have resources. And my mom calls me up, and I don't know this aunt, but my mom's like, you have to purchase 3 tickets for them. They have to go to a funeral. And I just say, okay. I don't know if I'll get paid back, but I have to do it. And so I do it. And then, several months go by. I don't know if I'm going to, be reimbursed or, all of those things, but it works itself out. And I think that I've come to understand that those relationships are important, and that people don't forget when you are generous, that they will remember that you've done something for them, and they will do something for you as well. Yeah.
Thank you both for sharing your story. I think your story for me specifically was one of the catalysts for community is the best investment that you can make. We asked Instagram and our audience members on Instagram what personal assets they had, and we got a ton of answers. Some people talked about how they were really good at organizing, or they also did haircuts. Well, one person specifically answered that they made 100 batches of pasta over COVID. And so I kind of want to ask this next question of, after learning what your personal assets are, writing down, this is what I'm good at and this is what I like doing, what is the next step? How do you capitalize on that? Do you invest right back into your community? Do you invest more into yourself or more personal assets? What's the next step?
Arshan, I'm guessing that question. You want me to reflect on that, right? um, yeah, I mean, I think it's important for us to know what our assets are, and whether that's language ability or things like having good credit, or all of those things that aren't necessarily always taught to us, but are vehicles for helping us do the things that we want for ourselves, but also to help communities. And I didn't always understand that, because my parents they were great savers. They made very little income, but they knew how to save, and that is how we were able to make some of the big purchases, like buying cars, right? They were getting, they were at minimum wage paying jobs, but I couldn't fathom how they saved what they saved in order to buy, even though we helped contribute to it. So they were really smart about that, but they didn't understand credit, that in order to build like a credit profile, you have to actually have credit cards and things like that. And so I was fortunate that when I started college, I was offered credit cards, and I used those credit cards, and then realized that, you got to pay it back, and you got to pay it back with interest. And because my parents didn't like debt, I also grew to not like debt. Although I eventually learned the importance of having debt and building a credit profile, and have now I think a good credit score, and that having that good credit score is an asset and has been helpful to my family in many different ways, right? In terms of helping to access loans that are lower interest rates or things like that. And so I think there are things that we know because we are privileged to have been educated here, and we have language abilities that perhaps our parents or relatives don't have. But I think that, I think, Twyla, I shared with you that the purpose of money is not about, for me, is not about just being able to do well for myself. It's about how I express love to, the people who are close to me and that I care about. And so, and that it's important to learn about the various vehicles that exist, but at the same time, those vehicles are created not necessarily from a cultural understanding of wealth. And so we also then have the opportunities to look at all of our assets and think about how we might do things differently, so that our family members and community members can not just have asset, but that there are ways in which we might change things, so that the idea of savings or lending circles can actually be institutionalized, instead of just having them be cultural practices where we do it on our own and then don't benefit from things like increasing credit scores or those types of things. So there's different challenges and things like that, but I'm really fortunate that, and look at my lived experience as a really important teaching tool for me to understand now what it is that I have and what I don't have, and who else to ask so that I can help myself and my community as well.
So, can we talk about that for a second? The idea of that being a teaching tool. I'd love to know that over the course of this, because you can tell how deeply invested in community you are, and how deeply invested in wanting to make sure that you're helping not just yourself but other people. But how do you invest in yourself? Take that skill set and also use it to enrich yourself and advance yourself, personally and and professionally, as you're making your way, in community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, look, I think I'm a believer that anything you don't know, you can learn. And so ask many questions, and also ask people who are smarter than you, because they can always teach you something about something, whether it's the rules or whether it's about a product or those types of things. And so I am always really curious, because I find that a lot of the problems that I or my family has are also problems that other people have. And so when I talk about those problems, I try not to just complain about the problem, but I try to figure out like, okay, well, so what can we do, right? If access is an issue, how do I share the story from the perspective of why something didn't work, and then be open to sort of hearing what others think could work better, so that I can just help to facilitate the creative energy that everybody has, both about understanding rules and products as they exist, but also to push back and say why that doesn't work, right? Because oftentimes people are used to saying, well, the best way to building wealth is home ownership. Well, I say, well, what if the community doesn't think that financial wealth is what they want to build, right? What if they want to preserve our language, for example? How do you define wealth more broadly? And we just finished earlier this year, published a report about what wealth means to Asian Minnesotan communities. And they were very clear that wealth is not just financial, it's also about culture and language and history and, all of those things, right? So what matters to communities, and things like that. So I feel like the idea of being able to authentically talk about who you are, being able to also listen well for people who have ideas, but also pushing ourselves to think beyond what is and to talk about what can be is also really an important approach to making sure that we don't just accept products and rules and systems as they are, but that we push the boundary on sort of saying, what if we look at this issue from a different angle, right? What if banking products were not just an individual tool, but they were a family tool? What would it need to do to ensure that whole families can participate? What if we look at building wealth not as a person acquiring skills to just get a high paying job, but what if we look at it and say, ask them who has helped to take care of you, or who do you have to take care of, and what would that mean in terms of how we get those people involved? I think it's more about being looking at a problem through many different angles and then trying to solve that, right? So I find that people are generally very generous with the skills that they have. They're going to share what they know, and at the end of the day, if we can be open to how things could be done differently, then I think we're going to do a better job of both helping people achieve their individual dreams, but also helping them to be better caretakers of their communities.
And just listening to what you're saying, I mean, it seems to me there's just so much the broader society can learn from the Hmong, the way you're talking about wealth, what you're talking about different products, but always with this community base. And I mean, that's what I love about it. And, that's what, it's an unfair question because, we don't have, how much time do we have? But
Right.
it's like more people need to hear and listen to what it is you're talking about, the report that came out about rethinking about wealth and what does wealth really mean, but that there's so much the broader society can learn.
I hope so. And I would say that it is human nature to want both happiness, to want relationships that are healthy and all of those things. And people are looking for ways to be able to take care of themselves and to also be seen for all of the assets that they have. And at the same time, to be to be able to build individuals who can also be contributors to collective well-being. And I hope that the lesson that we take from communities who have learned to take care of each other in spite of their circumstances, whether that be, coming as my family did as refugees who came with just 2 plastic bags and are still able to take care of each other, is that we should be thinking about that, right? That money alone is not going to bring happiness, but if we can build and support each other in achieving our full potential and making sure that everyone in our community has that ability, but also that we reward and incentivize collective caretaking and generosity, then I think that we have a potential for building communities who can be stronger and more prosperous and thriving.
So I'm going to flip a question that we asked you originally. We asked you from one perspective the first time you changed it. How are you teaching your kids about money?
So what I try to do with my daughter, because she has no idea, I tell her many stories about my own childhood because I want her to have perspective about the advantages and the privileges that she has now, not from somebody else's story, but from my own. So I try to make sure she understands that all the privileges that she has now are not privileges that everyone has, and that I didn't grow up that way. So we do a lot of stories, and then I tried to really expose her to the world that she belongs to, which is not a world that where everybody, unfortunately, at this moment is has the same things, and so that's really important. And we don't always talk about money, but when she wants something, I make her calculate how many hours do you think that takes to get that thing, right? And how long would you have to do that? And also to talk about what it means to save, what it means to share, and what and the difference between things that she wants and needs and things like that. And so she's learning. So for example, for her birthday, instead of asking for gifts for many years now, she's 10, but I think it started when she was 3. She, instead of asking for gifts, she'll pick 3 charities where she says, you can pick one of these organizations to give to. And I tell her that's because you have everything you need already. What is getting another plastic toy, And that hasn't stopped, unfortunately, everybody from getting her gifts. But I think it's the fact that she can make that decision, right? And that she doesn't feel like she's missing out on anything, and things like that. So I would say we try, but it is not easy because we live in a culture where what she sees every day is people bragging about the things that they have, right? Not necessarily the relationships that they have, the things that are actually will make people happy. And so I know I'm fighting against that. So I try to really just have an open relationship with her where we're talking about these things and talking about the purpose of money in her life. Yeah.
I think that talking about the money with purpose, those are the things that stick with you over a lifetime. And particularly as you get older, so. I think those are things you just remember. And so I think it's really wonderful. And I love the giving to the charities.
Yeah.
Well, it creates, doesn't it create a little bit of a kindness paradox? Your child wants to do something that's giving, and in return, everyone wants to reward her more for being so giving. So it's almost like it's hard to believe that you're killing the lesson. Let her do the thing. But
Twyla, you're telling me. Yeah, she's also the youngest girl on my side of the family, so everybody is more than generous with her, and we're grateful for that. But we also try to say she really doesn't need anything.
Yeah. Well, can I ask you? I heard a little bit earlier in the year that you and your family had taken on another initiative, and as soon as when I heard a little bit about it, I just thought, of course they did. It was so quintessentially what I understood of the spirit of your family. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that with me?
Uh, do you mind, Twyla, just naming it? Because I feel like I'm doing a bunch of
Well,
things. So,
I was told about your family coming together to help create almost like a giving circle, but to extend it
oh,
outward,
sure.
outside of your family.
Okay. Yes. So actually, it didn't start this year. It's been several years now. So we pull our resources together with several other Asian American families in Minnesota to fund social justice projects, and part of that was really just the idea that there's not a shortage of people who have good ideas to do good in the community, and that I alone, even though I spend a lot of my time and days trying to do good for the community, that there are many other people, and so I could help to support that. But I alone, while important, it also matters that I do that with a collective of other families who want to do the same thing. And so we have a giving circle called the Building More Philanthropy with Purpose Giving Circle, and we've been funding projects for since 2013. And so, it just gives me a lot of hope to be looking at these projects in which people really want to bring all of their assets to bear for the purposes of building community and addressing, the needs, but also that everybody who has an idea should have access to support, and that it doesn't always have to come from big institutions and foundations, right? So I'm really proud of that work, and just so grateful for the families who want to participate in making that happen for the community. Yeah, and all of our kids participate in it. So
I also love that when I brought it up, you were like, "Wait, what's the good thing that I do?" Because I do a lot of good. There's a lot of things.
I don't know. Yeah, my personal family, we just established a scholarship in my parents' name at the University of Minnesota. And part of that is, my parents are these two farmers who never got to go to school, but they did everything to make sure that we could. And so I was talking to another friend this morning, and we said, why should our parents who didn't have anything not have things in their name? And so it's their legacy that they left for us, but that the purpose is to make sure that all of the other students who will benefit from their their aspirations, hopes, and dreams for us, that they have support, however small it might be, and that they know that they are also brilliant and can and should achieve academic success. Right.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Bo, for sharing your story and giving us advice and giving our audience advice. Because I think your story is really important and meaningful, and definitely like one of the catalysts for me to understand what personal assets mean. So I appreciate you coming in today.
Thank you, Arsha, and thank you both for having me again. I really enjoy the conversation with all of you. Yeah.
It's our honor, pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To everyone else, thank you so much for tuning in. We hope that you're ready for the launch of season 2, which is on another deadline in late September. In the meantime, we hope in late September. In the meantime, we hope that you stay connected by visiting our social media, which will be found at the bottom of the screen here, or you can search Small Change Podcast. If you haven't listened to season 1, which we hope you do before season 2 comes out, you can find the episodes on our website, smallchangestories.org, or you can stream on Spotify, Apple Music, or Google Podcasts. Thank you, everyone, once again. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Twyla. Thank you, Bo. Thank you for everyone for tuning in. And please remember that community is the best investment a person can make.